because of time. But the second, I think, development is qualitatively new and best be characterized as a new uninhibitedness or mental statute of limitation. 60 years after the end of World War II, the grace period, by the way, expressed with this very, to me, very ugly German term, Schonzeit, which means what I said, the weak. In fact, far from it, they are the strong. They are, in fact, the oppressors of another weak group, in this case, the Palestinians. To be sure, merely expressing the wish of having the Holocaust muted, or in fact, having pro-Palestinian positions as the aforementioned Bielef 7 points. I get angry when Israelis destroy Palestinian homes. I think the Israelis should give the Palestinians more rights. That are on and on and on, even stronger ones, and these are not ipso facto anti-Semitic. And then there are other classic anti-Semitic things, like, I won't shake hands with a Jew, Jews. For a time, this formulation signified the division between the left and the right. The left side stood for confronting the past, assuming the responsibility and liability, and a decisive rejection of anti-Semitic prejudice. Though for most of the left, of course, at this stage too, issues involving Jews and anti-Semitism and the Holocaust were marginal at best in society. It's actually, we forget that it was really only in the course of this mid to late 70s until 1991 that you really had this very brief period of really coming to terms with the past. Only Israel, by relying on votes from the Social Democrats, then the opposition in the Bundestag. This aid was always called Wiedergutmachung by the Germans, best translated as restitution or reparation, which I think is misleading and even exculpatory in the terms because it was unclear what it was supposed to restore or repair. Since the late 1970s, however, by members of Germany's intellectual, cultural, and political elite. One of the steadfast chroniclers of the trend has been the Berlin-based Jewish journalist Henrik Broder, who writes for the weekly news magazine Der Spiegel, in addition to commentaries on his website and numerous books and articles. His book, Der ewige Antisemit, which was, is he alive still, or?
The guy's not known. I mean, I know what he said.
Okay, that's a very, because this is often, and he said, of course, the famous quote is, the Germans will never forgive the Jews for Auschwitz. The Germans will never forgive the Jews for Auschwitz. I think very, very telling. By the way, and maybe later on we can discuss it, a major atrocity in Algeria. And this is now, again, I'm not trying to exculpate here the French army, but this is a new entering into the debate about memory, okay, which in fact may be distinguished from ordinary anti-Semitism, with which, however, it shares most of the usual stereotypes, by its defense mechanism against guilt. This phenomenon was first described by the two legendary members of the Frankfurt School, of course, Theodor Wiesengrund Adorno and Max Horkheimer. Although their writings, to be sure, are national, the ill-fated German bourgeois democracy was declared in 1848, which then collapsed. A German writer by the name of Martin Walser, very, very big in the German-speaking world, I think rightly not very big in the rest of the world, was awarded the Peace Prize by the famous historian Heinrich von Treitschke, who published an article accusing Germany's Jews of insufficient willingness to assimilate, and it led to the big debate between Treitschke and Mommsen, the two major historians of the time. He basically a Jewish character who has the vilest traits of standard anti-Semitism. He's greedy, haughty, arrogant, oversexed, speaking in Polish accented German, and is clearly recognizable as a Marcel Reich-Ranitzky, one of the most important German cultural critics on television. Among other things, Lawrence reveals that Walser, in a speech honoring the late Victor Klemperer, who may be of may be of knowledge to you, I think in some ways his 2 volumes probably the best eyewitness accounts of that he too would have been sent to death camp. The fact that even Chancellor Schroeder expressed solidarity with Walser during the 2002 election campaign indicates the reversal that has occurred since Germany was in fact united. In his speech on 11 October 1998, Walser referred to, this is the famous speech on the Paulskirche, which to be sure was not the first to speak of the so-called Auschwitz cudgel, Auschwitz Keule, but he gave such notions his poetic blessing. Toward the end of his speech, the audience in the church rose to give him a tumultuous standing ovation. Among the 1,200 guests, the thank you address for the Peace Prize for the German Book Communist Party called DKP. Then already, however, in 1987, Walser told the weekly left-liberal German magazine Stern, and I quote, "For a while one rides on the guilt and atonement train because one simply has to travel along. But during the journey one is thinking about entirely different things, unfittedness about anti-Semitism in the public discourse, and more important, the society's emotional repertoire." The first was a gathering at Humboldt University in Berlin on 8 March 1999, at which I shared the podium with Gremlitzer and Bubis. The second was a lengthy interview that Bubis gave Gremlitzer in Concrete. Notorious or Red Army faction leader, actually major applauder and advocate and welcomer of the massacre of the Israeli athletes. I'll talk about relief among the U.S. Army, and it kind of has this pro-Western leftist, pro-Israeli leftist position. Not by chance, it is this publisher that picked up my book in Germany like this, published it in less than 3 weeks, and it's now in its 3rd edition, coming into its 4th edition. Precisely a very small leftist group that is pro-Israeli campaign. When Michael Friedman, the then Vice Chancellor, ran choice, after he invited the novelist to share the podium with him on, again, such a random date, to Nida Rümelin, who then was culture minister. Walser was a writer who had already started to deal with the all-important and in post-war Germany much neglected concept of the nation. Inviting Walser then was in fact a very wise choice by the Chancellor. Then SPD in general expressed tolerance toward a writer who had openly and repeatedly made anti-Semitic statements. The paradigm shift that has occurred in public and political debate in Germany is well, I think, symbolized by this event. There has been aspects of history have really are being now reinterpreted. 2 books, very important books, by Jörg Friedrich, one of them is called The Fire, the other one is called Fire Sights. Again, Friedrich, a radical leftist. The world, especially the extermination on the Eastern Front and against the European Jews. For instance, in Friedrich's account, the air raid shelters in which German civilians sought refuge became crematoria. The bombing victims become exterminated. The Royal Air Force 5th Bomber Group becomes an Einsatz. And like Walser, clearly Jörg Friedrich not in any way close to the right, Nazi, neo-Nazi, any of this. Lastly, of course, Günter Grasses, I can't go bigger than that, Nobel laureate. I think with Heinrich Böll argue a 31-year Kristallnacht in the Jewish Community Center and would have killed hundreds of people had it not been for a technical glitch. This occurred in a post-Holocaust West Germany in which anti-Semitism had supposedly all but disappeared, especially among the country's self-proclaimed progressive. While the uninhibitedness may indeed be new in terms of its broad public acceptance in Germany and Europe, its roots go back decades, if not centuries. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take questions.
To that in the more important point. The name of the psychoanalyst, by the way, is not familiar to me, and I do know most of the analysts of our generation, so I wonder
But it's long
who
ago.
it may be or whether you have the name correctly.
Yeah, no, I have it correctly. I mean, this I know, but I've actually never met the guy, and it's.
Did you say Rex or something?
Svi Rex.
Rex.
R-E-X.
Well, I don't know how to translate that expression.
Coming to terms with the past
Yes.
mass. Yeah.
You know Mark Twain's The Awful German Language, in which he tries to translate from German into English, and it's never successful. You can never really get the correct translation. But this, I wonder, what is your opinion as to whether this Vergangenheitsbewältigung is actually possible or whether it's an illusion?
Okay.
Because you see,
Onefold is, from my point of view, and I think that of most Jews, the answer is no, it can't be done. One could go even further and say, should it be done? Some would argue it shouldn't even be done. I'm actually not sad. Nobody has come close to what the West Germans have done. Kol hakavod, big deal. And I mean this, okay? It was from society, it was not imposed, the so-called by fiat in East Germany. Oh, it's all capitalism? You're not capitalist, so fine, exonerated. Wholesale quantity on every count way ahead of the East Germans and of the Austrians, both of whom had an important exit option, which the West Germans didn't. Namely that of being victims, the Austrians by the Moscow Declaration of '43. We are the first victims of Hitler, not so. Then I need a little, because I will not remember everything. Yes.
Okay, my question relates to a change in the world situation. Now, Israel is once again threatened publicly in such a way that the world perceives it as perhaps